A single spotlight falls on a courtroom bench, its harsh glow casting long shadows beneath the fluorescent lights overhead. Tension lingers in the air, thick with anticipation, broken only by the shuffle of papers and the occasional murmur of whispered conversations. At the center of this drama stands a determined police officer, his posture rigid and unyielding, confident in his power, convinced that he is untouchable within the cold walls of the courtroom. Near him, a dignified black woman in a crisp suit stands, silent and composed, her eyes fixed on every move made around her. Little does Officer Christopher "Chris" Malone know, the woman he has yet to take seriously holds authority far beyond that of the judge presiding over the court. This is where the shocking events begin to unfold. It's a gray February morning in Philadelphia, with the wind ripping through Market Street like a knife, cutting through the chilled air as if it could pierce bone. At the foot of City Hall, where the imposing structure looms over the city like a silent sentinel, Chris Malone adjusts his navy blue jacket, pulling it tighter across his broad shoulders. The street is slick with ice, and he carefully steps over the patches, heading toward the courthouse entrance. Malone, who has served in the Philadelphia Police Department for nearly 15 years, is no stranger to this routine. He's passed through these corridors and security checkpoints countless times. Yet, today feels different. Despite the city's high crime rate, Malone's precinct is notorious for dealing with harsh realities. Poverty, violence, and a simmering distrust between the citizens and the police form the backdrop to his daily life. Over the years, this tension has seeped into his mindset, shaping his interactions with others. He's tough with detainees, unapologetic during traffic stops, and strict about the law to a degree that sometimes borders on excessive. His colleagues, for the most part, respect him, perhaps even fear him. There are murmurs in the precinct about how he enjoys wielding his authority, relishing in the power to command and control. But this morning, the lines of authority are about to blur in ways Malone never imagined. As he approaches the metal detectors in the courthouse lobby, he nods at the security guards who wave him through with hardly a glance. Familiarity, after all, has its perks. The chill of winter outside quickly fades as he steps inside the warm, confined space of the courthouse. The air is thick with the hum of anxious energy. Lawyers in wool coats hustle past, briefcases in tow, interns balance precarious stacks of files, and weary defendants sit hunched on benches, waiting for their turn in front of the judge. The sound of footsteps and voices echoes off the marble floors as Malone surveys the scene. That's when he notices her. A slender, well-dressed black woman stands near the far wall, her posture poised and dignified as she scans through some documents. She's dressed in a tailored black suit, a crisp white blouse, and her dark hair is swept back neatly, framing her face. Malone's trained eye immediately picks up on something that feels different. There's an air of quiet confidence about her, a resolve that seems almost too self-assured, too polished for the usual public defenders he's seen over the years. Her gaze lifts for a moment and meets his, before quickly dropping back to the papers in her hands. Malone frowns, momentarily intrigued by her calm demeanor, but quickly dismisses the thought. He has more pressing matters to attend to. The next hour is set to be just another routine hearing. The case involves a teenage suspect facing drug possession charges. Malone is sure the young man's attorney will try to plead for leniency, but he's resolved not to show any mercy. As he walks toward courtroom 302, his radio crackles with mundane updates from dispatch. Little does he know, today is about to become anything but routine, not a minor car accident on Walnut Street. Suspicious persons reported near an abandoned factory. Typical city chatter. Malone barely paid attention to the noise. His mind was on the boy in lockup. That was the real matter at hand. He had found enough paraphernalia in the teenager's jacket to suggest that heavier crimes loomed on the horizon. If a strong message wasn't sent now, things could spiral out of control quickly. Malone stepped into the courthouse, the stale air of justice hanging thick around him. Attorneys bustled about, while a family huddled in the gallery, conversing anxiously. The judge, with mechanical efficiency, scanned through a docket that was likely as familiar as his own morning coffee. Malone made his way to his usual spot near the front. Officers typically sat there. Just as he settled into his seat, someone else entered behind him. The footsteps were measured and composed, and they stopped before settling on the opposite side of the aisle. Malone turned, surprised to see the same well-dressed black woman from earlier. She didn't acknowledge him, but an odd twist of tension curled in his gut. He brushed the feeling aside, unaware that her presence would soon change the course of his life. The hearing began on schedule. Judge Harold Lindstrom, a seasoned man whose weariness was matched only by his stern formality, presided over the case. The prosecutor, a fresh-faced assistant district attorney, began reading the charges to the court: possession of narcotics with intent to distribute, resisting arrest, and obstruction of justice. The defendant, a teenager slouched in a wrinkled shirt too large for him, cast furtive glances at the gallery. Malone couldn't help but notice a woman, likely the boy's mother, sitting anxiously and wringing her hands. Officer Malone was called to testify, his steps heavy as he approached the bench. He stood tall, delivering the usual script. The suspect had been loitering in a known drug area, looked nervous when approached, and attempted to flee. His tone was clinical, but there was an unmistakable underlying severity. He emphasized how the suspect had refused to comply, retreating toward a deserted alley. As Malone finished, he could see the teenager's mother, on the verge of tears, struggling to maintain her composure. Next, the defense attorney, a frazzled public defender with hastily prepared notes, tried to poke holes in the prosecution's narrative. He questioned whether there had been a misidentification and whether the search had been reasonable. Malone responded with mechanical precision, his answers unwavering, as if he had rehearsed them countless times. But as the cross-examination continued, Malone's attention began to drift. He glanced toward the gallery, where a well-dressed black woman sat, arms folded across her chest, her legs crossed. She was listening intently, her focus almost disconcerting in its intensity. She didn't seem to be connected with either the prosecution or defense, and yet there was something about her gaze that felt commanding. The defense attorney, now stumbling a little under Malone's unwavering stare, concluded his questioning. Judge Lindstrom nodded and asked if anyone else wished to address the court. To Malone's surprise, the woman stood up. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she walked confidently to the front. She introduced herself as Miss Clarissa Johnson. That name was unfamiliar to Malone, and by the looks of it, to the rest of the courtroom as well. Her voice was calm and commanding as she addressed the judge. Your Honor, I believe there's additional context we should consider before finalizing how this case proceeds. I've been observing the actions surrounding this arrest, and I have reason to believe we need more extensive review. Malone stiffened, a flash of annoyance crossing his face. Who was she to second-guess him in open court? The prosecutor looked equally bewildered, while Judge Lindstrom raised an eyebrow. His interest piqued. The judge cleared his throat before speaking. Miss Johnson, I'm not familiar with your role in these proceedings. Are you with the district attorney's office? Her lips curved into a polite smile, but her voice remained unshaken. No, Your Honor, I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A hushed murmur rippled through the courtroom. Malone's jaw clenched. The FBI? This was no routine drop-in. Why would the FBI be involved in a simple drug possession case? Judge Lindstrom adjusted his glasses, a look of intrigue crossing his face rather than alarm. Miss Johnson, it's unusual for the Bureau to weigh in on a minor narcotics offense. May I ask for clarification? Judge Lindstrom's voice carried a note of skepticism as he looked toward Miss Clarissa Johnson. She offered a respectful nod, her demeanor calm and assured. Certainly, Judge. I'm not at liberty to disclose the specifics at this time, she began, her voice steady. But my presence here is part of an ongoing federal investigation. I can tell you that certain elements of this arrest, along with other incidents in this precinct, have caught our attention. For now, I request that the court keep this case open while additional inquiries are made. Malone could feel the heat creeping up his neck. He never liked outsiders meddling in the department's affairs, especially not the FBI. The room seemed to constrict as the tension became palpable. Judge Lindstrom glanced from Miss Johnson to the district attorney, then to Malone. The assistant district attorney cleared his throat, uncertain how to proceed. Finally, Judge Lindstrom gave a sharp nod. Miss Johnson, I'll allow your request. This hearing will be continued pending further investigation. He banged his gavel lightly. We are adjourned. A flurry of whispers erupted throughout the courtroom as people filed out. Miss Johnson didn't look at Malone as she walked past, but he felt her presence like a scorching sun at his back. She had just publicly disrupted his case. He narrowed his eyes, certain that trouble had just found him in the form of this enigmatic FBI agent. Outside the courtroom, the usual hum of courthouse routine was replaced by hushed chatter. The teenager's mother, who had been anxiously awaiting the outcome, looked hopeful now. She embraced her son's attorney with palpable relief. Reporters hadn't been present for this low-level hearing, but word traveled quickly. The corridors buzzed with rumors. An FBI agent had intervened at the last minute, and lawyers and clerks whispered theories about corruption, abuse of power, or perhaps some undisclosed, bigger case in the works. Frustrated and seething, Malone strode over to the vending machines, hoping a cup of lukewarm coffee would settle his nerves. As he reached the machine, his colleagues from the precinct gathered around him. What was that about? Asked Officer Tim Rogers, a younger cop with wide, worried eyes. The FBI over a petty narcotics case. Malone shrugged, trying to dismiss the concern. Beats me, but I'm not letting them drag me into some witch hunt. I follow procedure. The punk had the drugs on him, no question about it. Officer Janet Phelps, another colleague, joined them, crossing her arms over her bulletproof vest. You think it's about you, specifically? She asked, leaning in and whispering, I heard that woman mention other incidents. She must be investigating something bigger. Let her investigate, Malone said, his voice low and tight. I've got nothing to hide. But as the words left his mouth, a creeping doubt filled him. He remembered all the times he had bent protocol, times he had bullied suspects into confessions, used intimidation to force compliance, or performed searches in gray areas of probable cause. If any of that had been caught on camera or reported, he could be in deep trouble, especially if the FBI was digging around the precinct for any signs of wrongdoing. He took his coffee from the machine, the hot liquid sloshing ominously in the cheap paper cup. The tension in his gut remained, but he was determined to keep his composure, especially in front of younger officers who looked up to him. For years, Malone had enjoyed a near untouchable status. He considered himself a realist, the kind of officer who got results. But now, that veneer of invincibility was starting to crack, all because of that Miss Johnson and the federal investigation she was leading. Meanwhile, Clarissa Johnson walked briskly down the corridor, her confident stride drawing the attention of those around her. But she neither invited nor acknowledged their stares. There was an air of purpose about her that suggested she had no time for idle chit-chat. What the gathered officers failed to notice was that she had paused near the elevator, speaking quietly with an older man in a charcoal suit. He gave a subtle nod, and they exchanged files. Perhaps it was for a different case, or maybe it was the very documents that linked Malone's name to a pattern of questionable arrests. It was impossible to tell, but one thing was certain. This was far from over. Clarissa's calm expression never wavered as she stepped into the elevator, disappearing behind the silver doors. Once the courthouse settled into its usual rhythm, Malone made his way out into the crisp evening air. The cold wind bit his face as he crossed the plaza, his free hand jammed into his pocket. He mentally flipped through possible scenarios. What could the FBI be after? Had there been complaints filed against him? He was no stranger to accusations. People threatened lawsuits or internal affairs complaints all the time. Most of the time, they led nowhere. But there was something about Miss Johnson that felt different. She wasn't some rookie agent. Her quiet intensity, that unwavering stare, suggested a seasoned professional with a well-honed sense of justice, the kind that didn't back down easily. Malone climbed into his squad car, tossing a half-empty coffee onto the passenger seat. His jaw remained tight as he turned the key in the ignition. He reminded himself that he had years of experience navigating tricky waters. The FBI, led by some prosecutor or not, wouldn't catch him unprepared. At least, that's what he tried to believe. A few hours later, Clarissa Johnson entered the Philadelphia field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was located in a nondescript building near Arch Street, buzzing with activity. Agents, analysts, and administrative staff worked tirelessly, moving through the daily tasks of federal law enforcement. She flashed her ID at the security station and moved briskly down the corridor passing half-open doors. Inside a small conference room, she met with a team of fellow agents and legal advisors. On a whiteboard in front of them, pinned photos and typed notes connected lines, forming a complex web of potential misconduct within the Philadelphia Police Department. Rumors of fabricated charges, questionable searches, and excessive force had circulated for years. The Bureau had now gathered enough cause to suspect deeper misconduct, possibly orchestrated by a small group of officers who either turned a blind eye or actively participated in unlawful practices. Clarissa had been assigned as the lead prosecutor on what was shaping up to be a major case. She had started her career as a top student at Temple University's Beasley School of Law, a renowned institution in Philadelphia, before moving swiftly through the ranks at the Department of Justice. Her work with the FBI on high-profile investigations solidified her reputation. It wasn't common for the FBI to bring in a special prosecutor unless the matter was considered of significant importance. That day in court, she had focused specifically on Officer Christopher Malone, whose record displayed a disturbing pattern of heavy-handed arrests. The father of the teenage suspect had approached the Bureau months ago, claiming that Malone had planted evidence on multiple young men in his neighborhood. Internal affairs had seemingly dismissed or shelved the complaints, but Clarissa and her team had begun gathering their own documentation. "Any word on Malone's reaction to your move today?" asked Special Agent Darius Green, a tall, mild-mannered man with close-cropped hair. Clarissa set a slim folder on the table and answered with a steady voice, "He's not pleased. From what I've gathered, his bravado will likely push him to double down. He feels untouchable, and he might do something careless under pressure." Agent Green nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Pressure can make suspects reveal themselves more clearly, but let's be cautious. He might lash out unpredictably. We need to protect the kid and his family." Clarissa gave a firm nod. "Agreed. I'll request protective surveillance for the boy's family, just in case." Their conversation then shifted to broader matters. Which officers in Malone's circle might be complicit, how local politicians could be involved, and the timeline for building an ironclad case. Clarissa's calm composure belied the complexity of the task at hand. She knew that exposing police corruption was never straightforward. There would be pushback from within the department and from influential figures in the city who didn't want negative attention. But she also understood the weight of the mission. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was a necessary one. Clarissa Johnson had always believed that justice needed to be served, especially for communities of color, which all too often bore the brunt of over-policing and questionable stops. Her own life experiences had shaped her unwavering dedication to ensuring accountability in law enforcement. Growing up in a tough neighborhood in Baltimore, she had witnessed firsthand how corrupt authorities could devastate lives. That painful memory fueled every step she took in her pursuit of justice, her mission to fight for those who had long been silenced by an unjust system. When the meeting ended, Clarissa stayed behind, poring over the array of files in front of her. They were filled with statements from witnesses who claimed that Officer Chris Malone or his associates used intimidation tactics to silence them. There were even a few cell phone videos, partial recordings of rough arrests, though none were conclusive on their own. But each shred of evidence was a vital piece of a much larger puzzle. Clarissa slid the files into a large envelope before leaving. As she did, she allowed herself a brief moment to reflect on Malone. Standing tall in the courtroom, arrogance lacing every word. He had no idea of the force mobilizing against him, and if he suspected anything, he would likely try to hide or destroy the evidence. She would need to move carefully, ensuring the investigation remained thorough and secure. With that thought in mind, Clarissa turned off the conference room lights, stepped into the hallway, and mentally braced herself for the next round. The storm was only beginning. Officer Chris Malone's precinct was a squat, aging building made of brick and fluorescent glare, nestled in North Philadelphia. That evening, Malone entered the station with a swirl of agitation building in his chest, scanning the hallway for any sign that his colleagues had heard about the FBI's intervention in the court case. Word had likely spread by now. As he made his way down the corridor, he found Lieutenant Frederick Fred Dawson waiting for him, arms folded across his barrel chest. The lieutenant's face carried a mixture of concern and sternness, two emotions that rarely visited him at the same time. "Malone," Dawson said in a low tone. "My office. Now." Malone followed him into the cramped office. The room was stacked with case files on shelves that sagged under their weight, and a half-dead fern drooped in the corner. Dawson closed the door behind them and leaned against it, his expression serious. "I heard about what happened in court," Dawson began, his voice controlled. "FBI, huh?" Malone exhaled sharply, gripping the back of a chair for support. "It's nonsense, Lieutenant. I made a routine arrest. The kid had narcotics on him. Suddenly some Fed wants to pretend I'm the criminal." Dawson frowned, his eyes narrowing. "Malone, you know we had complaints about excessive force. Internal Affairs looked into them, but so far, nothing stuck. Now we've got the FBI sniffing around. This is not good for the department." Malone tensed, his jaw clenching. "Are you saying you don't trust me?" Dawson shook his head slowly. "I'm saying I have to do what's best for this precinct. You better keep your nose clean. There can't be any more questionable stops. No more borderline force." "Understood." Malone bit back a retort, feeling the sting of being scapegoated. He nodded curtly, wanting to end conversation. As he turned to leave, Dawson called after him, his voice serious. "Keep it professional, Chris. We can't afford a scandal." Pushing through the hallway, Malone found Officer Janet Phelps. She gave him a look filled with thinly veiled concern. "Lieutenant on your back?" He let out a humorless laugh. "He wants me to behave. Pretend the city doesn't need firm policing." His voice dropped a little. "Just be careful," Janet whispered. "I don't want to see you in trouble." They parted ways, and Malone headed to the locker room to stow his jacket. A swirl of conflicting emotions churned in his mind. Resentment, fear, and a flicker of guilt. But overriding them all was a deep sense of defiance. He had come from a long line of cops. He believed, truly, that a city like Philadelphia demanded a strong hand to keep criminals off the streets. That's how he justified every rough arrest, every corner cut on procedure. But the question that nagged at him was how far he could push those beliefs before hitting a wall of federal authority. He grabbed his duty belt and headed out for his patrol shift. Snow flurries drifted lazily beneath the streetlights as he climbed into his cruiser. The radio buzzed with reports about petty vandalism, a shoplifter at a bodega, and a domestic disturbance. But Malone's mind wasn't on those calls. His thoughts wandered, consumed by the events of the day. The storm was brewing, and he couldn't help but wonder how long he could keep it from breaking. Through the labyrinth of narrow streets, Malone usually found that driving calmed him. He would hum softly, scanning the sidewalks for anything suspicious, his mind tuned to the rhythm of the city. But tonight, the glow of the city felt stifling. Every shadow, every figure seemed to be an informant waiting to catch him in a misstep. The usual comfort of the city's hum turned into a weight pressing down on him, suffocating and relentless. Eventually, he responded to a minor fender bender near a gas station on Ridge Avenue. A young man and woman were arguing about which car had the right of way. Malone stepped out of his cruiser, tension flaring the moment the young man eyed him warily. The man's girlfriend, seeing the interaction, pulled out her cell phone and began recording. Malone had grown used to bystanders filming every encounter, but today it felt different, like a personal ambush. "All right," Malone said, try to keep his voice neutral. "Let's get your statements, figure out the insurance, and keep the phone down, ma'am." She didn't budge, just making sure. "I've seen what some of you do," she muttered under her breath. Malone's mood darkened. He wanted to lash out, to command respect the way he used to, but Lieutenant Dawson's warning echoed in his mind. "Keep it professional, Chris. No more questionable stops." "Fine. Record all you want," he muttered. His pen scratched across the incident report, but inside his head, a storm brewed. "They're all out to get me," he thought. "The FBI, these civilians with their phone cameras." If he wasn't careful, he could lose everything. Or maybe, no matter how careful he tried to be, he was going to lose everything. The cold, swirling snow outside seemed to mirror the frozen, uncertain future that awaited him. Back at the FBI office the following day, Clarissa Johnson sifted through the new pieces of evidence that had come in overnight. The teenage suspect's father had managed to supply a few phone messages from neighbors who claimed their sons had been similarly targeted by Officer Malone. Some alleged that guns or drugs had been found in places that should have been clean, while others spoke of intimidation, particularly when individuals refused to comply with certain demands. Clarissa's heart sank as she read through the stories. If even half of these allegations were true, Malone wasn't just a bad cop. He was terrorizing entire neighborhoods under the guise of policing. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. It was a text from Agent Green. Found new witnesses. Bringing them in for interviews at 3 p.m. Clarissa checked her watch. There was enough time to put together a structured set of interview questions. She needed to verify patterns and determine if there was a consistent approach in Malone's tactics. One uncorroborated story could easily be dismissed as hearsay, but multiple accounts describing the same modus operandi could form a foundation of a damning case. Before she could dive deeper into the statements, her desk phone rang. Clarissa picked it up, her usual bright demeanor in place. "Miss Johnson, this is K.O. Donnell from Morgan & Morgan's Philadelphia office. We spoke briefly last month about that potential case involving civil rights violations." Clarissa recalled the conversation. Morgan & Morgan was a well-known law firm with a significant footprint nationwide. The firm had collaborated with federal authorities on large-scale civil suits, taking on powerful opponents with a resourceful team able to dig up facts that supplemented criminal investigations. "I remember," Clarissa said. "Thanks for calling." K.O.'s voice carried both excitement and gravity. "I understand you're looking into possible police misconduct. We've had additional complaints from families who believe their loved ones have been framed. We'd like to share our files if you think it could help your investigation." Clarissa leaned forward in her seat. Her interest piqued. "I'm very interested. We're working hard to assemble concrete evidence. Could you bring the files by today or tomorrow?" "Absolutely," K.O. replied. "I can come by after lunch." Clarissa thanked her and hung up. The puzzle pieces were multiplying. If Morgan & Morgan civil suits aligned with the allegations against Malone, it could be the breakthrough the investigation needed. With the testimonies her team was gathering, Clarissa felt confident that they could establish a pattern of misconduct that even the most skeptical judge or jury could not ignore. The evidence was mounting, piece by piece, forming a strong case that couldn't be easily dismissed. Her next phone call was to the U.S. Attorney's Office. She wanted them looped in early. This investigation had the potential to reach far beyond Malone. Clarissa's role as an FBI special prosecutor was somewhat unique, but she often worked closely with the local U.S. attorney for final indictments. If the evidence was strong enough, they would bring federal charges against Malone and possibly others. Could this investigation extend beyond Malone? Clarissa suspected so. Officers rarely operated in a vacuum. Silence within a department could be just as dangerous as active collaboration. If Malone had acted alone, he was still likely part of a culture that allowed his behavior to thrive. Clarissa took a deep breath, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. But alongside the weight was a steadfast resolve. She had dedicated her life to ensuring that power was not abused, that those sworn to protect and serve were held accountable for their actions. If Malone was systematically violating people's rights, Clarissa was determined to bring that truth to light, no matter how fiercely he resisted. As rumors of the FBI investigation spread to the neighborhood, fear and cautious optimism stirred among residents who had felt the brunt of Malone's tactics for years. Some believed that justice might finally be served. Others worried that any attempt to hold the police accountable would only result in harsher retaliation from the local officers. At a small community center near North Broad Street, a group of mothers gathered for their weekly support session. The group typically discussed childcare, job hunts, and safe after-school options for their children. But tonight, the conversation shifted to a more serious concern, the creeping tension on their blocks. "I heard there's a lady from the FBI poking around," said Denise, a mother of two. "They say she's the one who shut down a hearing the other day. Maybe that means they'll finally do something about Malone." "Maybe," added Carla, a mother whose son had nearly been arrested last year. "He harassed my boy just for walking home from the store. Asked him if he was dealing. Forced him to empty his pockets. Thank God he didn't plan anything." Some women nodded in agreement, while others looked wary. "We can hope," one woman said quietly, her eyes on the floor. "But you know how it goes. You speak up, they come for you. In the corner, a teenage boy who volunteered at the center listened intently, gripping the handle of a mop. He had seen Malone in action once. A humiliating scene in which the officer forced a group of young men to kneel on the sidewalk for half an hour while he searched them for contraband. The boy's friend had told him, "Just pray he doesn't decide to hide something in your jacket." The memory of that moment made the teen's stomach tighten. Meanwhile, across town at a police union gathering, a small group of officers were voicing their frustrations about outsiders meddling in their affairs. Some insisted that Malone was being made a scapegoat, while others felt uneasy, as if a reckoning was looming. The union representative urged caution, reminding them to strictly follow protocol during the ongoing investigation. At City Hall, the mayor's office was receiving calls from concerned citizens and reporters fishing for statements. The mayor's press secretary, a woman named Jana Lowry, carefully weighed her words as she drafted a statement. She affirmed the city's full cooperation with the FBI, but without admitting to any wrongdoing by the police. Such balancing acts were part and parcel of politics. Even the district attorney's office found itself in a quandary. Should they stand by Malone's arrest, or should they open an internal review? Worry simmered among prosecutors who had relied on Malone's testimony in past cases. If it was discovered that Malone had fabricated evidence, even once, all his prior cases could be jeopardized. By the end of the week, the tension was almost tangible. Clarissa Johnson had quietly interviewed multiple witnesses and gathered documents from Morgan & Morgan, detailing a half-dozen pending civil complaints against Malone or his immediate subordinates. Each piece of evidence brought them one step closer to uncovering the truth, but also made the stakes higher for everyone involved. Each new complaint, every questionable report felt like unearthing another layer of a deep-seated problem. Yet, Officer Malone remained on duty, unwilling, or perhaps unable, to see that the ground beneath him was beginning to crumble. He brushed off the swirling gossip of bravado, doubling down on traffic stops and searches, desperately seeking that faint sense of control he feared losing. What he didn't realize was that with every action he took, every report filed against him, the case against him grew stronger. Unbeknownst to Malone, Clarissa's investigation was steadily gaining traction. The wheels of federal justice might turn slowly, but they were turning nonetheless, and soon the first cracks would appear in the seemingly impenetrable armor he so confidently wore. 2 weeks later, a crisp March morning breathed a hint of spring into the Philadelphia air. Officer Malone arrived at the courthouse for a follow-up hearing regarding the same teenager's case. This time, the judge had requested updates from the FBI to decide whether the charges should stand or be dismissed. Malone strode into courtroom 302 once again, his shoulders squared and his mind convinced that official procedure would protect him. The suspect's mother and father sat in the front row, their eyes alight with nervous hope. Their son, now clad in a fresh collared shirt, filled with a collar and discomfort. At precisely 9 a.m., Judge Lindstrom appeared, and the session came to order. A murmur spread through the room as the district attorney's seat remained notably empty for a moment. Then, to Malone's surprise and growing discomfort, Clarissa Johnson entered, approaching the prosecution's table. She was joined by an assistant U.S. attorney, a tall man in a pinstripe suit named Bryce Langston. Judge Lindstrom peered over his reading glasses, his voice sharp with curiosity. "Miss Johnson, Mr. Langston, I see you're representing the prosecution today." "Yes, Your Honor," Clarissa replied calmly. "We reviewed the circumstances of this case, and if it pleases the court, we'd like to provide an update." Malone's fists clenched, his knuckles whitening with a sudden surge of tension. He suspected a trap. The teenager's defense attorney blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting a shift in the prosecution. The roles seemed reversed. Why would a federal prosecutor step into what had originally been a state matter? Clarissa's calm voice resonated through the hushed courtroom. "In the interest of justice, we've concluded that the narcotics charges against the defendant lack sufficient evidence. Additionally, there is a credible indication that the arresting officer engaged in questionable conduct. As such, we request that all charges against the defendant be dropped, pending the outcome of a larger investigation." A stunned silence hung in the air. Judge Lindstrom rubbed his temple, clearly taken aback. Miss Johnson, are you implying that Officer Malone fabricated evidence? We are suggesting that there is reason to believe the evidence used to justify this arrest did not originate with the defendant, Clarissa clarified tactfully. Given the gravity of these allegations, we cannot proceed with a prosecution based on evidence that may have been tainted. Judge Lindstrom looked over at Malone, who had risen from his seat, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Officer Malone, do you have any rebuttal? Malone's voice emerged tight with suppressed fury. Your Honor, I have served this city for 15 years. The suspect was caught with illegal substances. There is nothing tainted about it. My record speaks for itself. Clarissa's eyes flicked to him, their gazes locked in a silent battle of wills. We have multiple witness statements, Your Honor, challenging Officer Malone's account. In light of these statements, the government believes it is unsafe to proceed with the case. Judge Lindstrom exhaled, glancing between Malone and the teenager's defense. Given the FBI's ongoing investigation, I will dismiss the charges. The court will not ignore allegations of evidence tampering. His gavel struck the block, and in that instant, the teenager's family erupted into a wave of relieved whispers. The boy's mother hugged him, tears shining in her eyes. Malone stood frozen, his gaze locked on Clarissa. His fury was almost palpable, and for a moment he wanted to lash out, to accuse her of waging a personal vendetta against him. But he knew it was too late. The cracks had formed, and they were only going to widen from here. A personal vendetta? The words burned in Malone's throat, but as the bailiff signaled for everyone to clear the courtroom, they failed him. Clarissa and Mr. Langston quietly gathered their papers. Malone stormed forward, his voice trembling with rage. What the hell do you think you're doing? He hissed. Clarissa paused, turned to face him with unflinching composure. My job, Officer Malone. You want to speak to your attorney. He opened his mouth to retort, but before he could, she walked away, leaving him standing there with his fists clenched at his sides. In that moment, he felt his carefully curated world begin to crack apart. The following days brought a deluge of administrative maneuvers. The Philadelphia Police Department placed Malone on paid leave pending the FBI investigation, citing procedural necessity. Malone felt blindsided, though part of him had expected this move after the judge dismissed the charges. A media frenzy quickly followed. While the case remained under seal, reporters caught wind of the serious inquiry into potential corruption. Local news vans parked outside the precinct, outside the FBI building, and even outside Malone's modest row house in South Philly. His neighbors whispered about his probable guilt, while a handful still defended him, convinced it was all a smear campaign. Holed up in his living room, Malone kept the curtains drawn. One morning, pacing back and forth with the phone in his hand, he dialed the union representative for the 10th time, demanding updates. I need to get back on the job, he insisted. I didn't do anything wrong. The union rep's voice was careful. Chris, it's out of our hand for now. This is a federal probe. You might consider an attorney. Malone slammed the phone down, cursing under his breath. He had always carried himself with swagger, confident of his place in the city's machinery. Now, with that foundation gone, he felt restless and exposed. Every ring of the doorbell or knock on the door could be more questions from the press, or, worse, a new wave of FBI subpoenas. In a cramped second bedroom that served as a makeshift office, he rifled through old files, searching for anything that could exonerate him or at least undercut the FBI's accusations. There had to be some paper trail or video that proved his innocence. He had always believed he was simply enforcing the law, and if he pushed boundaries, it was for the greater good. He stopped at a sealed folder labeled with the name of a prior suspect from 2 years ago. Flipping it open, he remembered how the entire case had gone down. The suspect had been convicted, partially based on Malone's testimony. Now, as he stared at the file, doubt crept in. If the FBI was thorough, would they re-examine that case too? A chill crept up his spine. Meanwhile, Clarissa Johnson and her team were methodically sifting through Malone's past. They had requested department logs, body cam footage, and dash cam recordings. Strangely, some of Malone's body cam videos had gone missing in the official archive. Other times, the footage cut out seconds before a suspect was searched. These anomalies raised red flags for the FBI. In the FBI's conference room, Clarissa circled dates on a large calendar taped to the wall. Each circled day corresponded to an arrest involving Malone that had questionable evidence. Next to each date, Agent Green annotated the location, the alleged offense, and whether the suspect had filed a formal complaint. The pattern was undeniably suspicious. Across the table, a junior analyst tapped away on a laptop. "We've identified at least 7 cases with eerily similar circumstances, Miss Johnson," analysts reported. "We're also hearing about intimidation tactics, threats to families who protested too loudly. The question is, how many other officers are involved?" Clarissa nodded, her face serious. "Keep digging. If we can show he operated under a silent agreement with others, we can expand the charges to conspiracy. That tends to hold more weight in court." A pang of discomfort settled in her chest as she thought about the scale of the operation they were uncovering. It wasn't just Malone they were after. It was a deeply rooted system that could take down far more than just one officer. Clarissa's thoughts were focused on the families whose lives had been torn apart by the actions of Officer Malone. If these allegations were true, it was her duty to ensure that justice prevailed, that the legal system worked for everyone, not just for those in power. This was the moment, the point at which they were so close to unveiling the truth, and it drove her forward. Soon, a new hearing would be scheduled, one in which she would present the initial findings to a judge and possibly a grand jury. The city's eyes were turning toward the FBI's case and Malone. Whether he realized it or not, he stood on the brink of a fall far larger than any he had ever imagined. On a chilly afternoon, Clarissa stepped out of the FBI building into a throng of reporters who had congregated on the sidewalk. Cameras clicked and microphones jutted forward. "Miss Johnson, can you tell us if Officer Malone is the main focus of this investigation?" asked one reporter. Clarissa raised a hand politely, her eyes resolute. "I can't comment on ongoing investigations. We appreciate your patience and cooperation. Are more officers being investigated?" Another reporter called out. Clarissa didn't answer. She continued walking toward the waiting black SUV, refusing to feed the media with speculation. Inside the vehicle, Agent Green sat in the driver's seat. He gave her a sympathetic shrug as she buckled her seatbelt. "It's only going to escalate from here," he remarked as he pulled away from the curb. Clarissa sighed. "I know. Our best move is to finalize the core evidence so we can secure indictments. Once that's done, it won't be just rumors anymore." They drove in silence through the congested streets of the city. The architecture shifted from gleaming skyscrapers to old brick row houses, passing neighborhoods that spanned the socioeconomic spectrum. Each block told its own story, both of heartbreak and resilience. Agent Green stopped outside a neat duplex in a modest area near Germantown. "This is the next witness," he said. Clarissa nodded. They exited the car and carefully made their way up the steps. A lanky teenage girl answered the door, her eyes wide with concern. "You're the FBI lady, right?" she asked. "Yes, I'm Clarissa Johnson," Clarissa replied gently. "Is your mother home?" The girl nodded, ushering them into a small living room where a tired-looking woman sat on a couch. Her posture was guarded, and the air smelled faintly of cooking spices. The woman rose as Clarissa and Green entered, introducing herself as Patricia Jacobs. Patricia's son had been arrested by Malone 2 summers ago. The charges were eventually dropped, but not before he spent 3 weeks in county jail. The stress of that ordeal, combined with the legal fees, had nearly bankrupted the family. Now, the boy was off at college, trying to move on, but Patricia still nursed the wounds of that humiliating experience. She described how Malone had singled out her son while he walked home from a library job. It was dusk, and Malone claimed he saw the outline of a weapon. He forced Patricia's son to the ground, searching him. They never found anything. But the next thing they knew, they were being told he had assaulted the officer. He had no record, Patricia explained, her voice trembling. He never even had a parking ticket. But all of a sudden, he was facing charges that could ruin his future. Agent Green took notes, and Clarissa asked clarifying questions. Were there any witnesses? Did Malone's camera record the incident? There was a neighbor who saw from her window, Patricia replied. She told me Malone's body cam didn't seem to be on. She saw him fiddling with it and cursing. Then he handcuffed my son and threw him in the back of the cruiser. Clarissa exchanged a look with Green. Another instance of suspiciously missing or malfunctioning body cam footage. A pattern was starting to form. By the time they left the Jacobs house, Clarissa had gathered enough new intel to further bolster the case. These testimonies weren't just coincidences. They were pieces of a puzzle that painted Malone as a repeat offender. If the evidence matched departmental logs and footage timelines, it would confirm what they suspected all along. Officer Malone had been abusing his power for far too long, and it was time to bring the truth to light. For Malone, the mounting allegations made it extremely difficult to claim innocence. Meanwhile, he sat in his dim living room, ignoring the incessant buzzing of his phone from unknown callers. He had no desire to watch the local news, which he suspected was already running stories about his alleged misconduct. He remembered the day he first pinned on his badge, looking into the mirror with pride. He had felt like a protector, a guardian of the people. But now, that reflection was fractured by accusations that threatened to bury him. Or perhaps those accusations reflected a deeper truth he had refused to acknowledge. The pressure was mounting, and he was running out of places to hide. The tension reached a boiling point when Clarissa Johnson filed an official motion to present evidence before a grand jury. The city buzzed with speculation. Was Malone part of a broader conspiracy? How many of his previous arrests would be called into question? In the middle of this turmoil, an unexpected informant reached out to Clarissa's office. Officer Janet Phelps requested a confidential meeting. Clarissa set it up at a neutral location, a small conference room in the federal building, away from prying eyes. Janet arrived in plain clothes, her hair tucked under a beanie, her shoulders tense with apprehension. She cast a nervous glance around before sitting across the table from Clarissa. Agent Green stood by the door, arms folded, but offering a reassuring nod. Clearing her throat, Janet laced her fingers in her lap. I don't want trouble, but I also can't stand by and let innocent people get locked up. Malone, he's been crossing lines for a while. Clarissa leaned forward, speaking gently. We appreciate your willingness to speak to us. Everything you share will be handled with confidentiality until we're ready to move forward legally. What can you tell us? Janet took a shaky breath. At first, I thought he was just being tough on crime, but then I noticed too many coincidences. People complaining they were set up, missing body cam footage. I saw him once after a bust, and he looked almost triumphant. I asked him, half jokingly, "Did you really find that gun on the suspect?" He smirked and said, "Does it matter? The guy's a thug. One less criminal on the street." It made my blood run cold. She went on to detail how Malone often patrolled alone, turning off his body cam mid-stop. Whenever she tried to report these incidents through official channels, she was brushed aside or told to mind her own business. I'm worried the department is protecting him, or at least certain higher-ups are. Janet continued. He's got a reputation as a good arresting officer, lots of convictions. They like that for their crime stats. Clarissa's jaw tightened. Thank you for coming forward. Your testimony could be crucial, but you'll likely face backlash from inside the department. Janet nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. I know, but I can't keep quiet. Malone could ruin more lives, and if the Bureau is investigating, maybe the truth will come out. Clarissa and Agent Green assured Janet that they would do their utmost to protect her identity until the right moment. As Janet left, Clarissa felt a mixture of gratitude and sadness. One honest officer stepping up signaled that the system wasn't entirely broken, but also underscored just how deeply entrenched Malone's wrongdoing might be. That night, Clarissa carefully prepared her grand jury presentation, organizing witness statements, videos, and official logs. Each piece of evidence was a jigsaw puzzle, part carefully assembled to reveal the bigger picture, a pattern of misconduct pointing squarely at Malone. She also had to consider the possibility of corruption extending beyond him. The truth was a heavy burden, but she was determined to see this through. Meanwhile, Malone was descending into a spiral of desperation. He knew the grand jury was convening soon, and despite disclaimers that he shouldn't contact potential witnesses, he was tempted to reach out to certain individuals. Maybe he could persuade or threaten them into recanting their statements. But the more he thought about it, the clearer it became. This might be his last shot at turning things around. The weight of his past actions was closing in, and with every passing day, his chances of escaping the truth grew slimmer. The mounting pressure to intimidate those who might speak out twisted through Malone's thoughts, a mix of rational thought and seething anger. He felt cornered, and cornered animals could lash out in unpredictable, dangerous ways. In less than a month, everything he had worked for might collapse. His honor, his career, his pension, gone. And it all traced back to that black woman in the courtroom who had stepped in with a single devastating revelation: "I'm with the FBI." The day of the grand jury session arrived under a bright spring sun, an ironic contrast to the storm raging in Officer Malone's life. He arrived early at the federal courthouse, flanked by his attorney, a stern man in a sharp suit with a moral compass as narrow as a stare. Inside, Clarissa Johnson was already there, calmly reviewing her exhibits one last time. The familiar buzz of adrenaline coursed through her, the awareness of how high the stakes were propelling her forward. Agent Green stood nearby, shoulders relaxed, offering a supportive presence as always. By mid-morning, the prosecutors began laying out their case before the grand jury. Malone was eventually called to testify. His attorney stood by, cautioning him to answer carefully under oath. Malone maintained his innocence, claiming that any missing body cam footage was due to technical failures. The accusations of planting evidence, he insisted, were nothing but vindictive lies from criminals. But Clarissa systematically presented contradictory statements, witnesses who had no reason to lie, patterns in the missing footage that defied random coincidence, and internal department logs that painted a clear picture of Malone's consistent record of finding contraband. The logic was inescapable. A thick tension filled the room as the grand jurors listened intently, some scribbling notes. When Clarissa revealed that an internal police officer, referred to as a confidential source, corroborated the allegations, the air grew even thicker. Malone's face reddened with rage. He gripped the edge of the table, glaring at her with contempt. "Miss Johnson," he spat, "this is a witch hunt. You're blowing standard policing out of proportion. You sit behind a desk. You don't know what it's like on the streets." Clarissa met his gaze unfazed. "Officer Malone, the evidence speaks for itself. This isn't about smearing the police. It's about upholding the law. No one is above that, not even you." Hours passed as the grand jury deliberated behind closed doors. By late afternoon, they returned a true bill of indictment for multiple counts: civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. Malone's attorney's face fell as the news hit him. Malone stood frozen, stunned, his shoulders sagging. He was taken into custody on the spot, with bail set higher than he had expected. Outside, reporters scrambled for pictures. Shockwaves tore through the police department, with top brass offering carefully worded statements about their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. Some officers quietly cheered, relieved that Malone's tyranny was finally meeting consequences. Others seethed at what they saw as a betrayal of the blue line. Clarissa, for her part, felt a calm resolution settle over her as she stepped out of the courthouse, squinting against the flash bulbs and sunshine. She gave a brief statement, acknowledging that this was only the beginning of a legal process that might pull more individuals into its net. But justice, she believed, was taking its rightful course. Once hailed as a top arresting officer, Christopher Malone now found himself behind bars, awaiting trial. The press labeled him the face of a dirty cop scandal, and inmates recognized him from past arrests, jeering at him through cell bars. When guards escorted him through the corridors, he encountered the very system he had once manipulated. It was a harsh fall. He, who once roamed the streets with authority, now found himself on the other side of the law. Local news broadcast images of him in a jumpsuit, leading to citywide debates about reform, accountability, and the fine line between policing and persecution. Meanwhile, Clarissa Johnson continued building the prosecution's case. Each passing day brought fresh inquiries. Other officers, emboldened by Malone's arrest, came forward with additional testimony. A former partner. Witnesses admitted that Malone had bragged about cleaning the streets by any means necessary, including planting small bags of narcotics. Another officer mentioned a high-ranking lieutenant who might have turned a blind eye to Malone's actions. The entire precinct trembled beneath the weight of potential exposure, the possibility of more secrets coming to light. The consequences of Malone's actions were catching up with him in various forms. Friends he once counted on began distancing themselves, unwilling to risk their own reputations. His finances, once stable, drained rapidly under mounting legal fees. His wife, who had quietly endured his late nights and moody outbursts, packed her bags and left, taking their young daughter with her. She told him she couldn't believe he had risked everything for a twisted sense of glory. In his solitary moments, the full weight of regret pressed down on him. He had become exactly what he had once sworn to fight against, someone who misused power, whether or not he had intended harm. The end result was the same. Now, he faced a trial that could send him to federal prison for years. The harsh reality of that overshadowed any justifications he had once offered himself. At the same time, families who had been wronged by Malone found a measure of validation. The teenage boy whose case Clarissa had dismissed took a part-time job and enrolled in community college. His mother, once consumed by anxiety, now displayed renewed hope in her eyes. Patricia Jacobs, whose son had nearly lost his bright future, watched him thrive at university, free from the stain of a wrongful arrest. Whispers of final justice rippled through the community, yet Clarissa knew the road ahead would be winding. While Malone's arrest was a significant victory, the real test would come at the trial. Clarissa worked tirelessly, meticulously preparing evidence so airtight that no defense strategy could find a loophole. Long nights spent poring over documents weighed heavily on her mind, but she never wavered. Even as the city's attention turned elsewhere with new headline stories and fresh controversies, Clarissa and her team pressed on. She understood that dismantling abuse of power required sustained effort. In the quiet corners of the FBI field office, discussions focused on the best approach to potential co-conspirators, how to secure cooperating witnesses, and how to ensure that the victims would not be forced to reckon with the wreckage of lives built on crossing lines. 6 months later, the trial began in a grand wood-paneled federal courtroom. Large windows admitted the late summer sun, and the air carried that charged stillness found in high-stakes proceedings. Christopher Malone sat at the defense table, looking haggard in a suit that no longer fit him quite right. His attorney spoke in measured tones, attempting to discredit witness testimonies as unreliable or biased. He claimed that Malone had indeed turned off his body cam due to malfunctions, and that the contraband found on suspects was legitimate. But Clarissa Johnson calmly dismantled these arguments. She presented logs from the body cam manufacturer, showing no reported malfunctions during the times in question. She showcased consistent witness accounts of intimidation and introduced internal police memos that suggested Malone had a troubling pattern of stops that never made it into official records. Finally, she called Janet Phelps to the stand. The officer bravely testified under oath about Malone's remarks and actions. The jury listened, some faces openly showing disgust as evidence of racial profiling came to light. Others stared at Malone, perhaps remembering the ideal they once held for law enforcement. After several days of testimony, the prosecution rested. In her closing arguments, Clarissa's voice carried a quiet force. When those entrusted with upholding the law betray it, the damage extends beyond individual victims. It undermines faith in justice itself. The evidence shows, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Christopher Malone crossed lines over and over. No uniform or badge absolves him of that. The defense made one last desperate plea, arguing that Malone had been doing his best in a tough environment, suggesting that the ends justified the means. But the evidence was too overwhelming. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty on multiple counts, including civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. A hush fell over the courtroom as the judge called for the jurors' confirmation, then asked Malone to rise for the formal reading of the verdict. Malone's eyes flicked around, searching for something, perhaps a glimmer of pity or a faint chance of redemption. He found neither. As the judge declared him guilty, audible gasps broke out from some spectators. The weight of the verdict pressed on Malone like a physical blow. He lowered his head, exhaling shakily. His attorney's hand clasped his shoulder, but there was no comfort in it. Sentencing was set for a later date, but prison time seemed inevitable. Outside the courthouse, Clarissa stood at a podium to address the reporters. "Today's verdict affirms that no one is above the law," she said firmly. "Our commitment is to a system where justice is impartial, serving all citizens equally. Let this be a reminder that those who abuse power will be held accountable." In that moment, Clarissa felt both relief and sorrow. Justice had prevailed, but the process had also exposed deep societal wounds. She glanced at the families of Malone's victims, seeing tears of relief, gratitude, and lingering pain. Nothing could fully erase the trauma, but at least they had a measure of closure. In the aftermath of the trial, Philadelphia began a fresh conversation about policing, transparency, and community trust. Many residents felt renewed hope, inspired by seeing a corrupt officer face the consequences of his actions. Others learned that powerful institutions are not impervious to accountability when honest people stand up against them. Clarissa Johnson returned to her regular caseload, forever changed by this landmark case and the many lives it touched. Stories of justice are never just about one person's downfall. They're about communities uniting to demand better. If you believe in the power of justice and the resilience of those who stand up for what's right, share this story. Let others see that change is possible. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell to spread the message. Together, we can help justice prevail.